The Lecher antenna. This is the tool that I use in most of my practice. It's the tool that I teach as the basics to the ACMOS method, which is the big program, which is when we're training therapists to dive deep into people's energetic blocks and problems. But let's just take a step back a little bit and think about this antenna. The Lecher antenna, you may recognize as soon as I mentioned the radio set inside your car. On the dashboard of our cars, we had a radio set with a dial, and you turn the dial and the little cursor moves along. And when you hit the right station, the music comes through. And so when the music comes through, then you hear, and you sometimes in the old days had to twiddle the knob a little bit more to get it exactly on the station. And you would notice if you drove around the country that sometimes you had to either change the station because your local station had disappeared, or because the bandwidth was slightly different because it was coming from a different broadcasting source as you move location. And so you had to turn the dial of the radio to make sure that you could hear. And the national stations you could stay on, but the local stations you would, in my case, we would move from North Sound in the northeast of Scotland. And then when we got a bit further south, we'd have to move to Radio Tay and then Radio Forth. And so it would change as we went around the country. And so this instrument, very simple, simply a loop of wire. But the fascinating thing is that it underpins the history of modern communication across distance. It's been around, not in this small format, but the Lecher antenna principle has been around for about over 120 years now, because it was the end of the century before the last that it was developed by a chap called Ernst Lecher, which is why we call it the Lecher antenna. And he found that he could transmit between two sets of wires. One of them would be attached to a power source, and the other didn't have to have a power source. And instead of a bar of metal, he used a light filament across the two wires. And so he was able to demonstrate that the light filament would light up on both systems if they were set at the same wavelength. And he really was interested in measuring wavelength. He wasn't so interested in about the applications of that technology as it would be used within a very short time to create radio transmission. So radio transmission across distance made the difference between someone having to run across a battlefield to carry the instructions to their troops. Once we had radio transmission, the radio guys in the world wars, so going back 100 years, great big pack of batteries on their back and a dial to until they hit the right station. And when they hit the station that was broadcasting that day, so they had to know the codes, then they could hear the person speak at the other end and they could receive their information. So it was a transformational point in human history. We then went on to use the same principle technology to create television. So the old television sets, we had one channel, I think, to start with. So you just put your set on and that was it. I mean, Ted will be laughing at us oldies here. And then we had BBC One and BBC Two. And so you went clonk with a big dial, and behind, inside the big box of the television, the Lecher antenna went to the next station. And so this principle really facilitated and enabled radio communication across the last century. And look where it's got us today. We're sitting here on different parts of the world, all communicating across distance. So the beauty of this little tool is that it can still communicate across distance. And the power source doesn't need to be another Lecher antenna that is connected to an electrical source. The power source is within us all. So when you become expert at using this antenna, you can start working at distance with people. And I have clients in lots of locations around the world. And I use this as my mobile phone to call them up and to connect with their energy, to read what's happening. But as someone mentioned earlier today, the beauty of the Lecher antenna is not only that it can read the energy, but it can also change it. And so the Lecher antenna takes us beyond dowsing, beyond simply questioning, beyond simple measurements, into the capacity to then send back the corrective information. to recalibrate the person who we're working with, or the object, or the space, whether it's your home, whether it's your jewelry that you're wearing, whatever it is that you would want to test normally. Either, so the other forms of testing, kinesiology, dowsing, there are various types of what I call body dowsing. Now, what do I mean by dowsing? I came across a group of people recently who didn't know what dowsing was. And because I've been using that terminology for so long, it's really familiar to me. And so I associate dowsing with being able to ask questions, yes or no questions. And there's a real art to questioning. The quality of the question is the most important thing. If you can only get a yes, no answer. So with an antenna, I show you what a yes looks like. That's what a yes looks like. And I'll show you what a no looks like. That's what a no looks like. And so if you don't ask a yes, no question, and your question doesn't have a good quality, then you get confusing answers. But this today is not a day about presenting the antenna alone. It just helps you to understand what's led me into the realm of colors, because colors is part of the system that I use therapeutically. And also, it gives you a bit of fascination as to what's possible. When we engage the part of the mind to find out what's possible, then world's your oyster as to how you use that information. So I talk a lot about information, signals, wavelengths. This is all the physics of energy medicine. This is a tool that was developed by a physicist, and it was applied by another physicist, a German physicist in the 1960s, to the human body, initially with radiesthesia. Okay, so let's see.